Hello, everyone. Before we slip into tonight's story, take a second to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time it is on your clock. That way, the algorithm knows you're ready for more. Now, fade the lights and let the whispers begin. This happened about 2 years ago, right after I bought my first home in Naperville, Illinois. I was 28, single, and working full-time as a systems analyst for a logistics company in downtown Chicago. After renting crappy apartments for most of my 20s, I'd finally saved up enough for a down payment. I wanted something quiet, away from the city noise, something suburban, safe, boring even. And that's exactly what I thought I got. My new house sat on a peaceful cul-de-sac where everyone smiled at each other from their driveways and mowed their lawns on Sunday like clockwork. It had 2 stories, a finished basement, and this weird, low crawl space that stretched under part of the house. The crawl space was the only part that gave me pause. My inspector mentioned it might be a hassle if I ever had plumbing issues, and it definitely smelled musty, like wet dirt and old insulation. But it wasn't a deal breaker. I just figured I'd never need to go down there. The first few months were great. I was proud of the place. I painted, put up shelves, bought a brand new sectional from Costco, and finally got that massive flat screen I always wanted. Even though I was still commuting over an hour to work, it felt worth it. I had space, privacy, peace, and quiet. But sometime around late October, things started feeling off. It began with these weird noises late at night, the kind that make you pause your Netflix show and stare at the ceiling. First, it was small stuff. Creaks, maybe some faint scurrying. I chalked it up to the house settling, or maybe squirrels in the attic. No big deal. Then came the cold draft. Every time I walked past the hallway near the basement door, I'd feel this strange chill. It wasn't just temperature. It felt stale, like the air coming off a sealed tomb. Eventually, I started sleeping with a hoodie on, even though my heat was set to 72. Still, I didn't think much of it. I was a practical guy, data over feelings. But that logic started to slip when I began waking up at night. Always at the same time. 3:12 a.m. on the dot. I'd jolt upright, heart racing, with no idea why. I never remembered any dreams. Just this overwhelming feeling like someone was in the room with me. Then one morning, I came down to the kitchen and found the basement door open. I never left it open. Ever. I live alone, and I lock up obsessively. I checked the locks, the windows, even reviewed footage from my Ring cam. Nothing. No movement. No visitors. No reason that door should have been wide open. That's when I started hearing the dragging. It was a Wednesday night. I was up late debugging code, headphones on, when I felt a vibration through the floor. I paused the music and listened. There it was again. A low, grinding noise, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. It was coming from beneath the house, beneath my feet. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way downstairs, not even trying to pretend I wasn't scared. My basement was clean, mostly storage, and a workout bench I rarely used. The only thing down there that bothered me was the small wooden hatch built into the far wall, the crawl space. I knelt down and flipped the latch. The smell hit me first. Musty, damp, metallic. I shined my light in. The beam barely reached the back. Just rows of dirt, exposed insulation, and spider webs. I didn't see anything. But as I was closing the hatch, I noticed something odd near the far left corner. A bundle. It looked like a rolled-up coat or maybe a blanket. I couldn't tell. I was too creeped out to go in. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed listening for any sound. At one point, I swear I heard soft breathing. Not mine, just below the floorboards. The next day, I asked my friend Jake to come check it out. He's a maintenance tech at an apartment complex and has a high tolerance for weird. He showed up that Saturday afternoon with gloves, a headlamp, and a crowbar, just in case. We opened the crawlspace hatch together. Jake went in while I held the flashlight. He crawled around slowly, muttering about dust and spiders until he froze near that same far corner. Dude, he called out. There's bones in here. My stomach dropped. Like, animal bones? He didn't answer at first. Then, I think so. But they're big. And there's clothes. I told him to get out, but he was already dragging the bundle toward the hatch. It was an old, weather-beaten trench coat. Inside were several rusted soup cans, a ratty pair of gloves, and a torn notebook wrapped in plastic. Jake climbed out and handed it to me. The notebook was soaked through in places, but some of the pages were still readable. Scribbles. Pages filled with spirals, stick figures with no faces, and what looked like dates. One page had a list of names. Mine was on it. So was the previous owner of the house. A few names had check marks, others were crossed out. Another page had a crude map of the neighborhood, my street, with little symbols drawn over several houses. Jake and I stared at each other for a long time. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both thinking the same thing. Someone had been living down there, watching, planning. We took pictures of everything and called the police. An officer came by that evening. Nice guy. Took our statements, bagged the coat and notebook, and promised to look into it. He said it was likely an old squatter, maybe someone who lived there before and never really left. But he also admitted it was strange we hadn't found any signs of recent entry. No footprints, no damage. Nothing to suggest someone had come or gone. He suggested I stay somewhere else for a night or two while they investigated. I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted to show I wasn't scared. That was a mistake. The third night after the police visit, I woke up at, you guessed it, 3:12 a.m. My room was freezing, like windows wide open in January freezing. But they were all shut. And then I heard it. Breathing. Shallow. Wet. Coming from my closet. I didn't move. I just listened. It went on for nearly a full minute before fading. When I finally worked up the courage to open the closet, it was empty. But on the floor was a small pile of dirt, just like the soil in the crawlspace. I slept with the lights on after that. Over the next few days, things escalated. I started finding footprints on the hardwood floors, barefoot, long, narrow, way too long. The microwave would beep randomly at night. One morning, I came downstairs to find every cabinet in the kitchen open. The fridge was pulled a few inches forward. I thought maybe someone was messing with me. But there was no way in without setting off the alarms or tripping the ring cam. Nothing was ever recorded. Jake came back and helped me recheck the crawlspace. This time, we found something else. A tunnel. I'm not kidding. Way in the back, behind the insulation, someone had dug out a narrow tunnel into the dirt. Maybe 4 feet long, and just wide enough for a person to shimmy through. At the end was a small pocket lined with trash bags, a little nest. Someone had lived there. For how long? I don't know. Jake told me to call the cops again. I did. But when they arrived and searched the crawlspace, the tunnel was gone. Filled in, like someone had collapsed it from the inside. The officers looked at me like I was losing it. I showed them the pictures I took. They nodded, took notes, but didn't say much. I don't think they believed me. That night, I packed a bag and booked a hotel downtown. I never went back. I sold the house 2 months later at a massive loss. I didn't care. I just wanted out. Every so often, I get a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a piece of notebook paper folded up with a single line written in pencil. 312 is almost here. It's happened 4 times now. The last one came 3 weeks ago. I live in a high-rise now. Concrete walls. No basement. no crawl space. But sometimes, around 3 a.m., I still wake up in a cold sweat and swear I hear breathing, coming from inside the walls. This happened in the spring of 2021, back when I was staying with my sister Marissa in Ashburn, Virginia. I'd just graduated college, didn't have a job yet, and wasn't in any rush to move back in with our parents, so she offered me the guest room at her place until I got on my feet. Marissa owned a small 2-story townhouse tucked in one of those planned suburban communities, the kind of neighborhood where everything looks perfectly safe on the surface. Cookie-cutter houses with gray siding, tiny porches with American flags, friendly dog walkers, and the faint sound of sprinklers clicking in sync every morning. The kind of place where nothing weird is supposed to happen. At first, I loved it. Her house was quiet, clean, well lit, the kind of peaceful environment I didn't realize I'd been craving after 4 years of sharing dorms and hearing my neighbor's music through paper-thin walls. It even smelled like cinnamon from some overpriced candle she kept burning in the entryway. Marissa worked full-time in HR and had a long commute to Reston, so I usually had the house to myself during the day. I'd sleep in, half-heartedly apply to jobs online, maybe go for a run if I felt ambitious, and then binge old shows on her couch until she got home. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in months until I started noticing something weird. The guest room where I was staying had one window that faced the backyard. It was one of those smaller square windows, with old blinds that were bent in 2 places and never quite stayed shut. One morning, I woke up and noticed the blinds were halfway open. I didn't remember opening them. In fact, I was pretty sure I'd kept them shut because the sun hit that side of the house in the morning and basically turned the room into a sauna. I chalked it up to maybe a breeze from the vent or something I'd done without thinking. But a few days later, I noticed the same thing. I'd close the blinds at night, but by morning, they'd be slightly open again, just enough that someone could see out if they wanted to. I mentioned it to Marissa one night while we were watching TV. She laughed it off and said the blinds in that room had always been finicky, that maybe I was forgetting and just leaving them open. It made sense. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but something about it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just that the blinds were moving, it was how specific the opening was. Just a narrow slit, like someone wanted to see out without being seen from the yard. A few days later, I noticed something else. My earbuds went missing. I swore I'd left them on the desk in the guest room, but they were gone. I searched the drawers, the floor, even the laundry basket. Nothing. Then, the following week, I couldn't find my hoodie. Not just any hoodie, my favorite college hoodie. I hadn't even worn it yet at Marissa's. Again, I turned the room upside down. No sign of it. I didn't want to sound accusatory, but I brought it up to Marissa, wondering if maybe she'd done some laundry and mixed up our stuff. She just looked at me confused and said, "No, she hadn't touched anything in my room." It wasn't until the third incident that I started to seriously question what the hell was going on. I came home after a grocery run. Marissa was working late and noticed a light on upstairs. I could see it through the second-story window while walking up the driveway. The guest room. My room. Except I was positive I'd turned all the lights off before leaving. I stood outside for a minute, staring at the glowing square of light, wondering if maybe she'd come home early or had gone into the room for something. But when I stepped inside, the place was dead silent. No sounds, no movement. Her car wasn't even in the garage. I slowly crept upstairs and peeked into the guest room. The light was off. I stood there frozen, one hand still on the doorknob. I knew what I saw from the driveway. The light had been on, but now it wasn't. I walked over to the switch and flipped it. Nothing strange. Then I noticed something on the nightstand that stopped me cold. My missing earbuds, just sitting there, perfectly coiled on top of a folded hand towel. The same towel I kept in the closet for gym days. Everything about it felt intentional, like someone had placed it there to make a point. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, ears tuned to every creak and pop in the house. At some point around 3 a.m., I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Not loud, not fast. Just the slow, deliberate kind you'd make if you were barefoot and didn't want to wake anyone. I held my breath and waited, praying it was just Marissa getting water. But the steps didn't stop outside her door. They stopped outside mine. I couldn't bring myself to move. I stared at the crack under the door, half expecting to see a shadow block the light. But nothing happened. After what felt like an hour, the steps eventually faded. In the morning, I asked Marissa if she'd been up last night. She looked at me like I was nuts. She said she'd crashed hard after coming home and didn't even wake up once. I didn't press it. I didn't want to sound crazy. But I started locking my door at night. A week later, we were both home when it escalated again. We were in the kitchen eating dinner when Marissa casually asked if I'd left the window open in the upstairs bathroom. I shook my head. I hadn't even used the bathroom that day. She frowned and said she'd noticed it was cracked open when she got home. It was one of those crank windows that didn't open easily, and neither of us ever used it. She went upstairs to check and came back down pale. The window was wide open now. The floor beneath it was wet, like someone had stepped inside from the roof. That's when I told her everything. The blinds, the missing hoodie, the light, the earbuds, the footsteps. All of it. To her credit, she didn't laugh this time. She looked freaked out. We ended up calling the non-emergency police line. They sent someone out that night, walked through the house, checked the windows, and looked at the exterior. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No muddy footprints. Nothing they could act on. The next night, I stayed up late playing a game on my laptop. Around 1 a.m., I paused to get a snack and noticed movement on the camera app Marissa had installed on her phone. I opened the live feed. The backyard camera had picked up motion near the corner fence. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or something, but then I saw it. A man, tall, thin, wearing dark clothes, just standing at the edge of the yard facing the house. He didn't move. He didn't walk closer. He just stood there, looking up. I ran to the back door, flicked on the floodlights, and opened it. Nothing. The yard was empty. The corner he'd been standing in? Not a single footprint. But the app had recorded it. I showed Marissa. She stared at the screen for a long time, then silently closed the app. That night, we both slept with our doors locked and kitchen knives on our nightstands. A few days later, we found out the truth. Well, some of it. We decided to do a deep clean of the attic. Marissa had been meaning to for months, and after everything that had happened, we figured it couldn't hurt to check. Her attic was small and barely lit, accessible by one of those pull-down ceiling ladders. She went up first while I held the ladder. About 30 seconds after she climbed inside, I heard her say my name in this weird, shaky voice. I asked what was wrong. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, There's stuff up here, stuff that isn't mine." I climbed up and followed her toward the far corner of the attic. Behind some old storage bins was a pile of items arranged like a little camp. A sleeping bag, an empty water jug, food wrappers, a pair of old tennis shoes, and worst of all, a small stack of things that belonged to us. My hoodie, Marissa's hairbrush, my missing protein bar, even a photograph. A printed photo of me sitting on the couch, taken from behind the blinds. We called the police immediately. This time, they took it seriously. They swept the attic and found a section of drywall that had been removed from the attic wall, leading into the crawl space between our house and the unit next door. Apparently, the space wasn't sealed properly when the development was built. Someone had been living up there, sliding between the walls, watching us, stealing from us. They didn't catch him. Whoever he was gone by the time the cops searched. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no ID, nothing. We moved out 2 weeks later. Marissa broke her lease, paid the fine, and got a place on the 4th floor of a building with cameras in every hallway. As for me, I sleep with blackout curtains now. I keep my blinds shut, and I haven't opened a window at night in over 2 years. Because sometimes, even in my new apartment, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. And every now and then, I find the blinds open just a little wider than I remember leaving them. Before we jump into the next story, if you're enjoying these creepy tales, hit that subscribe button. We've got fresh horror chills waiting for you every night. I was 26 when I moved to Cedar Grove, Oregon. I'd just landed a job at a regional credit union, and after years of bouncing between cities and roommates, I wanted quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't come with honking, late-night bar fights, or neighbors screaming through thin drywall. Cedar Grove offered that. It was a town that practically begged you to slow down. The kind of place with actual porch swings, chalk drawings on the sidewalk, and grocery stores that closed before 9 p.m. When I found the house at 112 Sycamore Lane, it felt too good to be true. A charming 2-bedroom rental on a corner lot, tucked just past a row of old cedar trees that filtered out the noise from the main road. White siding, black shutters, ivy curling around the mailbox. It looked like something from a Hallmark movie. The rent was low enough that I asked twice if it was correct. The owner, a soft-spoken older woman named Mrs. Tully, said it had been empty for a little over a year since the last tenant left without notice. She brushed it off like it wasn't worth discussing. People leave leases early all the time, she said. But when I asked why he'd left all his furniture behind, she got quiet, changed the subject, and offered to knock $100 off the first month's rent. I took the deal. For the first few weeks, it was everything I needed. I unpacked slowly, worked remotely, took walks in the evening, and even started journaling again. The neighborhood was peaceful, and the neighbors seemed friendly enough. Friendly in that suburban way where everyone waves but no one asks your name. I didn't mind. I liked being left alone. There was only one thing that felt a little off: the grandfather clock in the living room. It was built into the wall beside the fireplace. A large wooden case, glass face, brass pendulum, and Roman numerals faded with age. When I asked Mrs. Tully about it during the walkthrough, she told me it hadn't worked in years. Purely decorative, she said. Doesn't tick, doesn't chime. Don't worry about it. I liked it. It gave the place a kind of old-world charm. But then, one night, about 3 weeks in, I woke up at exactly 3:12 a.m. I don't know what stirred me. No sound, no nightmare, just this eerie, sudden alertness. And that's when I heard it. Tick, tick, tick. I sat up in bed and strained my ears. The sound was faint but unmistakable. The grandfather clock was ticking. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Maybe it was the heater clicking on, or the baseboard expanding. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, 3:12 a.m., and the same soft, steady tick, tick, tick. The kind of sound that cuts through silence like a whisper. I went downstairs, half expecting to see someone standing in the living room. Of course, there was no one. But the clock's pendulum was swinging gently. No wind, no draft. Just that slow, hypnotic motion. The next morning, I texted Mrs. Tully and asked if it was possible the clock had somehow reset itself or started working again. She called me 5 minutes later, sounding flustered. Said that wasn't possible. That the clock didn't even have a mechanism inside. It was gutted years ago when it stopped working, and she'd never had it repaired. She told me not to worry, that it was probably just the wind, I didn't sleep well after that. Then, about a week later, the attic hatch opened by itself. I was sitting on the couch around midnight, laptop in my lap, when I heard a creak directly above me. I looked up and saw the square ceiling panel by the front door hanging open. The ladder hadn't dropped, just the hatch itself, ajar like something had pushed it from the inside. I froze. There was no breeze, no vibration, nothing that could have caused it to move. I hadn't even known there was an attic until that moment. When I finally got the nerve to stand up and reach for the hatch, I realized the air beneath it was cold, way colder than the rest of the house. I got a chair and closed it. That night, I left every light in the house on. The next few nights, I started hearing noises. At first, it was just faint scratching, like something moving through insulation. Then came the footsteps. Light, slow, and deliberate, always above me. I'd sit in the kitchen or lie in bed, and I'd hear them start from one end of the attic and move toward the center, toward the grandfather clock. Always at 3:12 a.m., then the dragging began. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across the attic floor, slow, jerky movements that sent dust raining down onto the ceiling fan blades. It would go on for several minutes, and then stop abruptly, always in the same place, directly above the fireplace. I tried everything, set up my phone to record audio at night, borrowed a thermal sensor from a coworker, even left baby powder on the floor by the attic hatch. Nothing. No prints. No changes in temperature. But the noises didn't stop. Finally, I worked up the courage to go up there. It was a Saturday afternoon. I pulled the hatch open, dropped the ladder, and climbed up into the attic with a flashlight, and my heart pounding in my throat. The space was tight, just enough room to crouch. Dust clung to every surface. I crawled slowly toward the center, expecting to find a dead raccoon or maybe a nest of squirrels. Instead, I found a suitcase. It was old, leather, buckled shut with a tarnished clasp and coated in decades of grime. But there were drag marks on the floor, like it had been moved recently. I opened it. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, some black and white, some faded color. Most were of the house, the living room, the hallway, the guest bedroom, different angles, different decades. But all of them had one thing in common: a figure. Sometimes it was just a blur in the mirror. Sometimes a silhouette near the fireplace. In one photo, dated 1996, the figure stood in the center of the frame, tall and thin, face blurred, wearing what looked like a long coat. And then I found a recent one. It was dated last week. I was in it, sitting at the kitchen table, eating breakfast. The photo had been taken from the attic vent, just above the archway that led into the kitchen. It was perfectly centered. That was the moment I snapped. I slammed the suitcase shut, climbed down, and left the house. I didn't pack. I didn't turn off the lights. I got in my car and drove 2 towns over to stay with a friend. The next morning, I returned with her and 2 of her brothers. We were going to clear the attic, call the police, and figure out what the hell had been going on. But when we got there, the attic was empty. No suitcase, no photos, no drag marks. The clock wasn't ticking anymore, but the front door was wide open. And on the floor, just inside the threshold, someone had carved words into the hardwood, long and shallow, as if scratched by a knife. Time isn't yours. I moved out the same day. Mrs. Tully didn't argue. She returned my deposit without question and never contacted me again. I still don't know what happened in that house. I've tried to look up its history, but there's almost nothing. No reported deaths. No police reports. Just one vague mention of a man named Ellery, who'd lived there in the 70s and vanished without a trace. Now I live in an apartment in the city. No attic, no fireplace, no antique clocks. But sometimes, around 3:12 a.m. I still wake up without reason. And once, just once, I swore I heard ticking coming from behind the wall. I've lived in Glendale, Arizona, nearly my whole life. It's the kind of city that feels like one big suburb. Single-story houses, palm trees, neatly trimmed lawns with decorative rocks, and heat waves so thick you can feel them rippling through your car window. Everyone minds their business but still waves when you drive by. It's comfortable, familiar, and until last year, I never had a reason to feel unsafe in my own neighborhood. That changed in the spring of 2023, the week after I turned 28, when the delivery van first appeared. At first, it blended in. This was a neighborhood where you could barely go 5 minutes without seeing an Amazon truck or DoorDash guy roll past. So when I spotted a dull gray van parked near the end of the street, I didn't think much of it. It had no logos, no windows on the side, just 2 front seats and a boxy cargo area in back. I figured it was just another contractor. But the thing is, it didn't leave. That first day, it sat on the street for over 3 hours. Engine off. No movement. I only noticed because Reggie, my German Shepherd mix, wouldn't stop growling at it through the living room blinds. It wasn't until around dusk that the van finally started up and drove off. Slow. No rush. Didn't even bother signaling when it turned the corner. The next day, it was back. Only this time, parked directly across from my house. It stayed there for nearly 6 hours. I work remotely, so I kept an eye on it. I even walked past it casually on my way to take out the trash. Couldn't see the driver. The windshield was so tinted it was almost black. No plates either, just a rusted bracket where a tag should have been. It gave me the creeps, but I told myself not to overreact. Maybe it was an unmarked delivery vehicle. Maybe the driver was resting. Maybe they were lost. I didn't know. But that night, something strange happened. Just after 2 a.m., Reggie went ballistic. He bolted to the front window, barking like someone was breaking in. I jumped out of bed and ran into the living room, half asleep, expecting to see lights or hear tires screeching. But all I saw was the same van, parked in the exact same spot. This time with its headlights off, engine idling. There was no knock, no movement, nothing. Just the sound of that low, rumbling idle. I stood frozen at the window, peeking through the curtain. That's when I saw the silhouette. Someone sitting completely still in the driver's seat. Not checking a phone, not adjusting anything. Just staring. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel right. I turned on the porch light. The van didn't move. I took a photo with my phone and stepped outside with Reggie on a leash, pretending to just be walking the dog. I didn't get more than 10 feet before the van quietly pulled away. No headlights, just brake lights flickering as it turned down the block. The next morning, I emailed the photo to the Glendale PD's non-emergency tip line, explained what happened, and asked them to do a patrol pass. They didn't respond, but the van did. 2 days later, I came home from a morning grocery run to find a package sitting on my front porch. No Amazon logo, no shipping label, just a plain brown box sealed with tape. My name, Michael, was written on it in thick black Sharpie, all uppercase. I hadn't ordered anything. I picked it up carefully. It was light. Inside were photos, dozens of them. All of me. Photos taken from a distance, from the side of the house, through windows. Some blurry, some disturbingly clear. There was one of me brushing my teeth, another of me eating breakfast, and the last one stopped my heart cold. It was me, lying in bed, asleep, taken from the foot of the bed. I called the police immediately. 2 officers showed up within 15 minutes. They took the box, the photos, and the statement seriously. Finally, they checked the exterior of the house, the backyard, even the attic. Nothing. but one of the window screens had been loosened, and the side gate was unlatched. Whoever had taken that last photo had been inside, at least once. I asked them what the hell I should do. Move? Install cameras? They suggested security cams, motion lights, and said they'd increase patrols in the area. They didn't offer much else. It felt like something out of a horror movie, and I was the guy the cops weren't going to help until it was too late. So I bought cameras, one for the doorbell, one for the driveway, another inside, facing the hallway to my bedroom. I changed the locks, reinforced the windows, slept with a bat next to my bed. For a while, things were quiet. Then, about 10 days later, the van came back. It showed up just after midnight, parked directly in front of my driveway this time. Engine off, headlights off. I didn't hear it. I saw it on the camera playback the next morning. The outdoor camera caught it pulling in. The side door opened, but no one came out. The door just opened and stayed that way for 30 minutes. Then it closed again. The van reversed and drove off. When I showed the footage to the cops, they seemed genuinely disturbed. One of them muttered something about it looking calculated. They advised me to stay somewhere else for a few days. I stayed at my parents' house in Sun City for the weekend. When I came back, I found another package on my porch. Same box, same handwriting. But inside this time was a shirt. One of my shirts. The same one I'd worn the night I left for my parents' house. But I hadn't left it behind. And taped to the shirt was a note. You left yourself unlocked. I don't even know how to explain the kind of fear that puts in your chest. It's not like a scream or a jump scare. It's cold. It's the kind of fear that makes you feel like your stomach is hollow. Like someone's been behind you this whole time and you never even noticed. I moved out that month. Didn't wait for the lease to end. Didn't even sell the house. Just left it. The landlord kept my deposit and probably thought I was insane. I didn't care. I moved into a condo building with cameras on every floor, a doorman, no exterior windows, and underground parking. I haven't seen the van since. But a few weeks ago, I got an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, no stamps. Inside was just one thing. A photo of me, walking Reggie through the apartment courtyard, taken from somewhere above. And written in black marker across the back were 4 words. Delivery confirmed, stay home. This happened 3 years ago, right after I had finally moved into my first home. I was 28, single, and fresh off a promotion at my job in Raleigh, North Carolina. I remember feeling proud, even a little smug, like I had finally crossed that invisible line between young adult and real adult. My new house wasn't massive, but it was mine. A 2-bedroom fixer-upper in a quiet suburban neighborhood called East Haven, the kind of place with white fences, outdoor potlucks, and block watch signs on every corner. The neighborhood felt safe, boring even. And after years of apartment noise and thin walls, that boredom felt like a blessing. Or at least it did at first. The house had charm. Exposed beams, creaky floorboards, a tiny attic. I liked the imperfections. They made it feel lived in, like I was part of a continuing story rather than the start of one. But the one thing I didn't like, the cleaning. I worked long hours, and I'm not exactly what you'd call neat by nature. So after a few months of dishes piling up and dust layering on shelves, I caved and hired a cleaner. Her name was Marisol, mid-40s, soft-spoken, with these tired eyes that made her look like she'd lived through a dozen lifetimes. She was recommended by my neighbor Deborah, who'd been using her for years. Marisol came by every other Tuesday around 10 a.m. and was usually gone by 2. She moved quietly, almost invisibly, never intrusive, never in the way. I barely saw her, to be honest. I'd leave the spare key under the mat, go to work, and come home to the lemony clean scent of her handiwork. The first month was uneventful. She even left sticky notes now and then. Check your fridge filter, or Mop handle is broken. Helpful stuff. But then, about 6 weeks in, something small happened. I came home one day and noticed a photo on my fridge was missing. It was a Polaroid. Me and my little brother at Myrtle Beach when we were kids. I figured it must have fallen behind the counter or gotten knocked off. I looked for it. Never found it. Didn't think much of it at the time. The following Tuesday, I noticed something else. One of the guest bedroom closet doors was open a crack. That room was mostly unused. I stored boxes in there and some old furniture. I knew I hadn't opened that closet in weeks, maybe months. I closed it, locked it, brushed it off. But then it kept happening. Week after week, small things would be out of place. A kitchen drawer left open, a different pillowcase on my bed, a shirt I hadn't worn suddenly hanging outside the laundry basket. Always subtle, always just enough to notice, but never enough to confront. I even began to question myself. Was I being forgetful? Paranoid? One night, I had a nightmare. In it, I was lying in bed, unable to move. A figure stood in the hallway just outside my door. They didn't speak or move, just watched. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, but told myself it was just stress. I was working longer hours than ever, skipping meals and drinking too much coffee. It made sense, right? But then came the Tuesday I stayed home. It wasn't planned. I'd come down with a stomach bug, and I didn't have the energy to get out of bed, let alone commute. I forgot Marisol was supposed to come. Around 10:05 a.m., I heard the front door open. I was still half asleep and figured I'd just explain I was homesick and let her do her thing. But I waited, and she never came upstairs. I stayed in bed, drifting in and out of sleep. Maybe an hour passed. Then I heard a creak. Not just any creak. The one from the guest room floorboards. I froze. No vacuum, no mop. No opening and closing of cabinets. Just one creak. I stayed still, holding my breath. Eventually, I heard the front door shut. I waited a few more minutes, then got up and walked through the house. Everything looked normal, except the guest room closet door was wide open. And I mean wide. Inside, the boxes had been moved. One was completely emptied onto the floor. An old sweater I didn't even remember owning was laid out across the chair in the corner. I called Deborah. I didn't want to make a big deal, but I had to ask. I said, "Hey, has Marisol ever acted strange? Or gone through your things?" There was a long pause. Deborah finally said, "I mean, no, not really. But she does ask weird questions sometimes." "Weird how?" I asked. "She once asked me what time I usually go to sleep, just out of the blue. Gave me the creeps." I didn't sleep well that night. The next Tuesday, I worked from home. I didn't tell Marisol. I parked my car down the street so it looked like I was gone, then sat in my upstairs office with the door cracked open. At 10:12 a.m., I heard her enter. Her footsteps were light, but deliberate. I waited. She started in the kitchen, then moved into the living room. Normal stuff. Then, quiet. For a solid 20 minutes, I didn't hear a thing. I crept down the hall, slowly peeking into each room. She wasn't in the kitchen, not in the living room, not in the bathroom. She was in my bedroom. I saw her through the gap in the doorway. She was standing by my dresser, not cleaning, just staring at my nightstand. I had a drawer there filled with random things, old journals, photos, concert tickets. I saw her pull it open and start reading one of my notebooks, not flipping through it, reading it. Slowly. I snapped. I pushed the door open and said, "What the hell are you doing?" She jumped, dropping the notebook like it had burned her. Her expression shifted from startled to something else. Calm. Like she'd been expecting this. "I was just checking to see if you were all right," she said. "You're in my bedroom reading my private stuff. How is that checking anything?" "I heard you weren't feeling well. I was worried," she said with this weird, neutral tone. "I've been working here for months. I care. It felt rehearsed, scripted. I told her to leave. She did, without a word. That night, I changed the locks. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. No name. Just, "There's still dust under your bed." I blocked the number. 2 days later, my neighbor Deborah texted me. She said Marisol had called her, crying, saying I had threatened her, and she was scared for her safety. I was furious. I hadn't even raised my voice. I asked Deborah to back me up if anything escalated, and she agreed. But things got worse. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing strange things. A rock left on my doorstep, my porch light unscrewed, a single glove on my windshield. I couldn't prove it was her, but I knew it was her. I started to wonder if she'd made a copy of my house key. I hired a locksmith to completely redo all the locks, including the back door and the garage. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a noise. It sounded like breathing. Not mine, someone else's. Close. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hallway. Nothing. I checked every room. All clear. But then, I opened the attic. You have to understand, this attic was barely used. Just insulation, a few boxes of Christmas lights, and cobwebs. No flooring. No reason to go up there. But I opened the hatch and pulled down the ladder. When I shined my flashlight into the space, I felt something in my chest twist. There was a pile of crumbs, crackers or toast, a bottle of water, a crumpled blanket, and on the beam across from the hatch, there was a series of scratch marks, deep ones, like from a key or a nail. Over and over again, it said, "I'm already inside." I backed down the ladder and slammed it shut. Called the police. When they arrived, they searched the attic but didn't find anyone. The blanket and crumbs were gone. So were the scratches. They probably thought I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. But I knew what I saw. I installed cameras the next day. Every room, every window, every door. That was 2 years ago. I've since moved to a condo on the other side of Raleigh. No cleaners, no attics, no guest rooms. Just a single-bedroom place with good locks and zero nostalgia. But sometimes, only sometimes, I'll find a sticky note on my fridge. No handwriting, no name. Just a message like, "You missed a spot." I used to live in a quiet cul-de-sac just outside of Boulder, Colorado. The kind of suburban street where everybody knew each other by name, waved when they drove past, and let their kids ride scooters until sundown. I was 31 at the time, single, and still renting after my divorce. The house wasn't anything special. 2 bedrooms and slightly uneven driveway, and a backyard that backed up against a tall wooden privacy fence. The neighborhood was built in the early 2000s, so everything still had that overly manicured, homeowners association-approved charm. It looked peaceful. It felt safe. But the house to my left was empty when I moved in, and it stayed that way for months. Grass overgrown, mailbox taped shut, windows always closed. The for sale sign had faded from red to orange. Nobody ever came for a showing. The neighbors just told me the owners had moved suddenly a year earlier. No explanation, no forwarding address, just gone. It felt like the kind of thing people wanted to forget. I didn't think much of it at first. I was too focused on my own life, recovering emotionally, settling into my new job, trying to stay busy. But it was hard not to notice that backyard fence. It stretched the length of my property and beyond, clean and solid, about 8 feet tall, with no gaps between the planks. The weird part? It wasn't part of the community fencing. It was built separately, a few years later, and only separated my yard from the abandoned house's lot. It felt deliberate, like someone wanted to block something out. Or in. The first strange thing happened about 3 weeks after I moved in. It was around 1:30 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. so I stepped out onto my back patio to get some air. The night was quiet. No wind, no cars, no animals, just stillness. I sat on the porch swing for a while, scrolling through my phone. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and raspy, coming from the other side of the fence. It said, "It's not safe in there." Clear as day, like someone was standing just a few feet away. I froze. I didn't even turn my head, just listened. The voice didn't speak again. No footsteps, no movement, just silence. I stood up slowly and walked backward toward the door, then went inside and locked everything. I barely slept that night, and I told myself it must have been a dream, or maybe someone passing through, even though I knew the lot was empty. The next day, I checked the fence. No gaps, no holes. I peeked through a knothole near the base, but all I could see was overgrown weeds and a shed with a half-collapsed roof. No signs of recent activity. No footprints. I even called the real estate agent listed on the faded for sale sign. She said the property was legally in limbo, with no active listing, and no one had entered the house in over a year. She sounded uneasy when I pressed further, like she knew more than she wanted to admit. For a while, nothing happened. I avoided the backyard after dark, kept the curtains closed at night, and convinced myself it was all in my head. But the unease never fully left. It was like the house next door was watching me, waiting. Then, in early December, I started hearing the voice again, always late at night, always from behind the fence. Sometimes it was a whisper. Sometimes it was louder, panicked, even angry. I never caught full sentences, just fragments. "You're not listening. It's here again. It knows." At first I responded. I'd say things like, "Who's there?" or "What do you want?" But I never got an answer. Eventually, I stopped trying. I just stood by the door, heart racing, listening. One night, I finally got brave. Or stupid, depending how you look at it. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed up a small ladder I had in the garage to peek over the fence. What I saw still messes with me. The backyard next door was overgrown, yes, but in the middle of it was a circle, like a fire pit, but not made of stone. The grass around it was flattened in a perfect ring, about 10 feet wide, and in the center were dozens of small objects. I couldn't make out what they were until I zoomed in with my phone. Toothbrushes, hair ties, socks, children's toys, all dirty, all old, all arranged with unnatural precision, like someone, or something, had been placing them there over time. Some looked new, others looked decades old. That night, I had a dream, or more like a nightmare. I was standing in my backyard, staring at the fence, when I saw fingers start to push through the wooden slats, not from the top or bottom, right through the wood, like the boards were soft, like flesh could pass through them. The fingers were pale, almost translucent, and the nails were cracked and black. I woke up in a sweat and immediately threw up in the sink. The smell of soil clung to me, even though I hadn't touched the ground. Over the next few days, things escalated. Lights in my house would flicker whenever I went near the back windows. My dog, a rescue mutt named Jasper, started growling at the fence for hours at a time, teeth bared, hackles raised. He refused to go outside after dark, even to pee. One night, I forgot and let him out before I turned the porch light on. He bolted back inside, whining, and had a scratch across his side that looked like a human hand had grabbed him. I tried calling the police, but they couldn't do anything. They checked the property and found no signs of trespass. They told me to put up security cameras. I did, but they never caught anything. Every time I reviewed the footage, it would glitch, skip, or worse, it would be replaced with black screens. One night, the recording was just 3 hours of static with faint, garbled audio that sounded like my own voice. except I hadn't spoken at all. I started getting mail addressed to the previous owners. Not junk mail, but handwritten letters. No return address, no stamps. Just folded notes slipped into my mailbox, even though I had a locked box. They were short. He still lives there. You can't dig it up. Don't speak to it. I burned them without reading more than a few lines. The final straw happened a week before I moved out. I came home from work late. Jasper was barking like crazy. I walked in, and my living room was soaked. The back windows had been shattered from the inside. Glass on the patio, mud on the floor, the smell of wet earth everywhere. I ran to check the yard, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of my lawn, right up against the fence. He was facing me, but I couldn't see his face. Just a mass of long, wet hair, like he'd crawled up from a riverbed. His hands were pressed flat against the wood, and there was something dripping from his fingers. I shouted, but he didn't move. I pointed a flashlight at him. Nothing. I stepped closer, yelling, "What do you want?" Still nothing. And then, finally, he spoke. But it didn't sound like a person. It sounded like dozens of voices speaking at once, all layered, echoing, bending in ways that hurt my ears. The only word I made out was, "Home." Then he vanished, gone, like smoke blown away in the wind. I packed that night. Didn't even wait for daylight. Jasper and I stayed at a hotel until I could break my lease. I took the financial hit. I didn't care. The landlord never asked why, just said I wasn't the first tenant to leave early. 2 months later, the house next door was demolished. No warning, no notice. A demolition crew showed up, tore it down, and left nothing but dirt. I asked around. Nobody knew who ordered it. County records still list the property as inactive. No owner, no permits. But sometimes, when I drive past that cul-de-sac, I swear I see something standing in that empty lot, just beyond where the fence used to be. And even now, when I lie awake at night, I hear those words again, whispered behind my eyelids. It's not safe in there.